My grandmother died a few weeks back at the ripe old age of 85, passing away peacefully in her sleep. By all accounts, she lived a damn good life, and I tried my very best to make it so. Lord knows she did the same for me. When a treasured loved one dies, especially one you grew up with, the little solar system of your life is thrown completely out of orbit. Not that mine was ever all that stable in the first place. My parents died in a car accident when I was 2 years old, and I was too young at the time to fully absorb the emotional impact of being orphaned. When the prospect of being put into the foster system was brought up by the family lawyer, Grandma took me in without a second thought. Her home was our home. It's where I built my childhood. You'd never meet a more charitable woman than my grandma. From the second I came into her life, all the way up to her death, and even beyond, she's provided for me without fail. Another interesting thing about Grandma is the fact she was mute. Not selective mutism, I'm talking full-blown, constant silence. I've known that woman for my entire 32 years of life, and while I got used to it within a few months, some people find it crazy that I never heard a word from her. Of course, we had our ways of communicating back then. I picked up sign language pretty quickly, and she always used to write on this little chalkboard for me. I thought it was awfully cute at the time. A few days after she passed, I got a call from her lawyer, telling me she'd left her entire estate to me in her will. No matter how well you know a person, that kind of thing always hits you deep. Everything that wasn't covered by her donor card now belonged to me. A week or two passed, some papers were signed, and money changed hands. The wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly as ever. My grandma's possessions became my possessions, and some eager patients became happy recipients of Grandma's remarkably healthy liver, kidneys, and lungs. Like I said, she was the giving type. The home was an old Georgian place. 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, and a well-maintained garden. I felt like a kid who just got a pony for Christmas. The problem was, I wasn't rich enough to pay the rent on an apartment and a house, and I'm not such a heartless bastard that I'd immediately sell my childhood home, especially in this bipolar property market. I was speaking to a good friend of mine about it over a few drinks, and it was his idea to convert it into a rental property. I mulled it over when I was sober, of course, but my office job wasn't going anywhere, so I decided that being a landlord might be a welcome change of pace. That was when things started to go downhill. I showed up at the house with all my supplies on Monday, my car full of paint, tools, and industrial-strength bin bags. It took me a few minutes to gather the strength to go in at first. This house had a lot of history for me. Good times, bad times, like I said, this was where I grew up, and Grandma's death had made all the nostalgia taste bitter to me. The faster I did it, I kept telling myself, the less it would hurt, like ripping off a band-aid. The place had barely changed since I moved out at 21. It felt like a picture, frozen in time, waiting for my return. I guess I granted its wish in that sense. It just didn't expect me to start tearing down the wallpaper. I was methodical, going from room to room, watching scenes from my childhood replay in the theater of my mind, before I started repainting and remodeling everything in sight. God, I forgot how ancient the place looked. Grandma's sense of style never really left the 70s. Once the first floor was bare and I dragged all the furniture onto the front lawn, my drinking buddies were suspiciously absent when I needed help with the heavy lifting. I had a break for lunch and did some exploring. The rooms upstairs were just like I remembered them. Grandma's room, and the bed she'd never again sleep in, was laid out neatly as ever. My room was the same, covered in peeling Nirvana posters and bearing all the hallmarks of your garden variety edgy 90s teenager. When I left home, I told her to turn it into a games room, or a quiet room where she could read her books, just something she could enjoy. I guess she never got around to it, or she expected me to come back someday. Tears welled up in my eyes when I saw that her old chalkboard was lying on my bed, with "Welcome Home" smiley face written on it. The one room I hadn't yet checked was the attic. Back when I was a kid, I was never allowed up there. Grandma said, or rather wrote, that it was too dangerous, so I stayed downstairs whenever she occasionally made her pilgrimage up the hallway stairs. But Grandma was dead, and I'm an adult. I figured that if the attic was big enough, I could convert it into a loft room and take on another lodger. It'd be more income if I was right, so it felt almost stupid to miss out. Flashlight in hand, I made my way up the stairs into the attic. The bulbs up there were long since blown, so my only source of light was the thin shard emitted by the flashlight. I've never been a superstitious man, but something about the attic made me feel uneasy. At first, I didn't see anything but old bags, boxes, and suitcases. I made a mental note to check those later while I forged deeper into the surprisingly spacious attic. My eyes were on the money, and the chances of being able to install a room up here looked hopeful. Then a shape got caught in the beam of my flashlight and I felt my heart skip a beat. It was shaped like a leg, a baby's leg, like it had been ripped from the socket. I rushed over to take a closer look and felt the greatest relief of my life when I realized it was plastic. Shortly after that, a second wave of creep set in, because what was a plastic baby leg doing in my grandma's attic? I picked it up and swept the area with my flashlight until I caught something familiar in the corner. That didn't make it any less weird though. There were dolls. Hundreds of dolls. Big, small, old, new, expensive, cheap. From porcelain dolls to Barbie dolls to American Girl dolls to Cabbage Patch dolls. All various sizes, shapes, materials, and colors. I almost dropped the flashlight when I saw all their dead eyes glaring at me, thinking my grandma was the next Rose West, until I realized that they were all fake. They were arranged in a big pile, like some kind of shrine. When my heartbeat had normalized again, I took a few steps closer, letting my flashlight cut through the gloom. So my grandma had been collecting these all these years, and she never wanted me to see them? Not a bad call, actually. They made me feel uncomfortable then. God knows what I'd have thought of them 20 years earlier. While I'm sure they had a lot of sentimental value to my grandma, they sure as hell didn't have any to me. And I figured that no lodgers would want to stay in a home that seemed like some demented serial killer's person-sized dollhouse. They had to go, all of them. I fetched some of the bin bags from my car and started packing up some of the smaller ones, just chipping away at them creepy bit by bit. The way Grandma had stacked them didn't even leave them all visible. It was dolls on top of dolls, each one just as horrible as the last. All except one. I found her lurking underneath the others, her face buried in the back of a tatty rag doll. It was like she didn't want to be seen, or that my grandma didn't want me to find her. She was bigger than the rest, about the size of a 4-year-old child, but with slightly off proportions. Her little pinched-up face was molded from rubber and plastic, and her long black hair looked like fiber-optic tubing. It's one of those things that's difficult to put into words, but something about her just repulsed me. Maybe it was those vacant blue eyes or the little silk dress that reminded me of those post-mortem photographs they took of children in the Victorian era. It all just felt eerie and wrong. Reaching out to touch her, the flashlight clenched between my teeth, felt like I was reaching to grab a live tarantula. She was a lot heavier than I expected her to be. The torch glare revealed all the tiny scratches and imperfections in the plastic, making her look even uglier. Another thing I noticed when the light was shining directly on her face was that while her mouth was closed, the rubber on her tiny lifelike lips wasn't sealed together. There was a black slit running between them. I have never felt as disgusted in my entire life as I did when those little lips twitched, like something was moving behind her dead face. My initial thoughts were animatronics, like those dolls designed to suckle on little bottles when you put them in their mouths, but this doll looked way too old for that kind of technology. So, being curious like a certain dead cat, I put my thumb on the doll's chin and gently slid open the mouth.